it's Kalia Monique. My first name's Kalia, my middle name's Monique. Long time no see, friend. Hi, how are you? Yeah, it's been, 2 weeks? I think it's been 2 weeks. It feels so much longer than that for me personally, but with no further ado, today's video I am super duper excited about because it is my top 10 videos of 2021. These are, I'm so excited to talk about them. For a lot of these books, I have already discussed them to some capacity on my channel, but maybe I didn't go in depth about it because I read it before the channel, or maybe I read it for a vlog and still didn't go that in depth about it because it was so new to me as a read. Now I've had time to think about it, and these books are constantly on my mind. I want to share them with you all today. With no further ado, here are my 2021 top 10 best books that I've read. It was very humbling for me to count out how many books of mine I have not yet read. I don't want to talk about it, okay? I don't want to talk about it. It's just so exhausting. Oh my god, no pictures, please. Yelling at them, just leave, get out, like leave now. We don't need to go through all this. Why are you heading towards trauma on purpose? I love you too. You're literally sunshine as a person, but thank you. Thank you so much. So we're gonna go ahead and do this countdown style. Starting off with number 10, we have Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This book was very, very surprising for me. Now, Shadow of the Wind follows Daniel, who, after his mother's passing, his father takes him to the Cemetery of Forgotten Books. While at the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, Daniel finds a book called Shadow of the Wind by Julian Carax, and Daniel falls in love with this book. He falls in love with the storytelling of the book and becomes quite interested in the author when he discovers that there is not a single book written by Julian Carax in the world anymore. It seems that every single book written by Julian Carax has been destroyed, forgotten, and has just completely disappeared off the face of the planet. He finds that there is someone going around destroying all the works of Julian Carax. So with his fascination for this book, The Shadow of the Wind, Daniel begins to investigate the author and investigate the story and tries to find out what exactly is going on with this book and why is there someone trying to destroy it. And this mystery surrounding this book was so intriguing. I love this book because this book loves me. Does it make sense? I hope it does. This book sees me. Okay? The grandest theme in The Shadow of the Wind is love and romance. It's sensual, it's romantic, it's just love in its purest and rawest form. It is heartbreak, it is chaos, it is tears, and with the mention of the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, there's this great understanding between how beautiful storytelling is and how it can truly be a romantic experience between the reader and the book that they are reading. And I love that Daniel worked in his father's bookstore. He has this deep love for books, and particularly this book, The Shadow of the Wind, that he found in the Cemetery of Forgotten Books. He has this deep understanding and this deep love for this specific book. And so what Carlos Ruiz Zafón does is he describes the love Daniel has for this book, and he describes the love a reader has for books and storytelling and how romantic it can be. And while he is doing this, while Carlos Ruiz Zafón is describing how beautiful readers find books and how romantic it can be for a reader to read a story, and how sometimes for readers, like, there's those special stories that truly are this this romantic relationship between the reader and the text. As he's doing that, I am feeling that for this text. I am feeling this like passion and intrigue and love. And it was just an overwhelming, consuming feeling. I think I was ready to cry 5 pages into this book, Daniel is dealing with the grief as a young boy of losing his mother. And so he talks about his love for his mother, and he talks about this mystery, and there's this way that mortality is discussed in a very simplistic form, because again, at the time, Danielle is a child. So there was that beauty, there was the beauty of that moment of a young boy discussing his love for his mother and missing his mother, and his father trying to explain to him that his mom is gone and our love for her is beautiful, and trying to explain the love between this young boy and his mother, the love this man had with his wife, and how he now has to care for their child by himself, and how he decides to use books and storytelling to help Danielle deal with that grief. And you can see that as the story progresses, in the loves that Danielle has, and how he's constantly looking for that mother figure. But then again, it goes from this love that a son has for his mother and seeking that love once again to romantic love and lust for women that he finds attractive for whatever reason. And then you start to see how the story Shadow of the Wind starts to reflect Danielle's own life. The parallels between Danielle's life and Julian Codex, as you learn the mystery surrounding this author, all of it just had you like, is this real life? Like, is this a contemporary work? Is this mystery? Or is this fantasy? Because I was like, is there some time machine happening? Their lives were so parallel to the point where you get so scared. Like, is Danielle Julian? Like, is Danielle Julian? Somehow is his story going to be the exact same? And you're just sitting at the edge of your seat the whole time hoping that it's not the same, but then also really being like, what is the story surrounding Julian Codex? I really need to know. It was just beautiful and devastating, and again, just the way love was described on so many various levels. We have the mother and son bond, we have romantic bonds, we have first love, we have the love between a reader and a story. It is just love, and it's love in its most devastating and purest forms at times. Next up at number 9, we have Clara and the Sun by Kazu Ishiguro. I love this book. I love this book so much. Okay, for the longest, sci-fi was something that I was afraid of, and yet Clara was exactly what I needed. It was a great way to ease myself into the genre, because it is sci-fi, but there's also this contemporary feel surrounding it, so it was kind of told like a contemporary story with a sci-fi element that helped me to be like, oh, I want to read more sci-fi. I just realized this wasn't the first sci-fi book that I read, but it is the reason that I continued reading sci-fi throughout the year. Clara and the Sun follows Clara, who is an artificial friend, which essentially is an AI who is a friend for young boys and girls as they grow up. Clara and the Sun follows Clara's entire story, starting off with her in the store waiting for whatever boy or girl decides to bring her home. And even from that very specific moment of her being in the store window, Clara is so intrigued by the world outside, so intrigued by people living in what's nothing more than to be the greatest artificial friend to whatever boy or girl buys her. This book was so beautiful. This book really touched upon what makes humans special and what about human existence is so worth it, and it's just so beautiful. There are instances in which this book discusses grief, and not necessarily of someone passing, but the fear you have when someone you love isn't well, and that fear you have that maybe they won't make it out of this. And it was just so pure and raw and beautiful. Clara has such a young voice because she is young. Like, it's not like ARAs are born and then they grow up. They're created, and so for the entire book you're just learning with Clara as she tries to understand humans and tries to understand how to be the best artificial friend to the human that chose her. It's just so pure and beautiful. I loved watching Clara figure out how to navigate the world outside of the store, and I loved seeing how Clara thought of other people. There were so many different relationships that Clara got to interact with throughout this story that I found so fascinating. I personally find human experiences just so fascinating. I was a journalism major, and that for the most part is why I find human experiences, human relationships, and how we interact with one another so fascinating. So to get to witness someone else witnessing it, it just felt so pure and beautiful. It is quite literally the least intimidating sci-fi I have ever read. Like I said, it reads more like a contemporary. For a lot of the book, I wouldn't forget that Clara was an AI, but it's easy to just think of her as like a child or like if you love books with animal companions, I think you would really like this book because again, it kind of felt like a very ultimately Clara was her friend's companion, and so it was like life through the psychic's perspective, and it was as if like an animal companion got a voice. Yeah, Clara just had such a young voice that it's kind of hard to compare her to anything besides a artificial friend, but she just had a young voice that was curious about the world, and in her observations there are so many different human experiences that we got to witness that was truly just so beautiful. It provided me this great opportunity of reflection in life and the relationships that we hold and keep, and just I loved it. At number 8, we have Darius the Great is Not Okay and Darius the Great Deserves Better, both by Adib Khorram. This boy right here. Am I pointing to the right one? Yes. Right here. Darius. My heart. Like, he has my heart. I love this character so much. I'm going to just describe the first book because duh. Now, Darius is mixed race. He is half Persian, half white. And due to familial circumstances, Darius and his family need to take a trip to Iran to visit his mother's family. Now, during this trip, Darius reflects on his identity being half Persian and how that relates to his interactions and his relationship with his mother's side of the family. Darius has never met these people in real life. He's only interacted with them through phone calls and video calls. He's never left the US in his whole life, and he also doesn't speak their dominant language. So there is also a language barrier that he deals with when speaking with his mother's side of the family. And Darius is really struggling with this as they deal with the familial circumstances that they are under at this time. I loved this book. Now, what I loved the most, like, there was just so many things I loved about this book. I loved seeing Darius really reflect on his identity being half Persian, or as he refers to himself, fractional Persian. I loved his voice because he did kind of speak in like almost like math. His favorite show with his dad is Star Trek, and he kind of speaks like someone who really loves Star Trek. The way he describes people seems like he's describing them through the lens of Star Trek, which is really interesting to read as a person that has never watched Star Trek and knows literally nothing about that world, because like even small details are referring to himself as a fractional Persian. But also what I really loved about this book was the mental health representation. Darius lives with depression, and this was quite literally the most beautiful depiction of this that I've ever seen in my entire life. Every book that I've ever read dealing with the character living with depression is them either just finding out that they have depression, or it's them going through a very extreme episode, which are very valuable and important times in people's lives when they are going through depression. That is a great depiction that is very important for people to read. However, when you live with depression, you're not going through an episode every single day. You have episodes, but there are also days where you're just living with it, and there are times where you need medication, and there are times where you need to change your medication and adapt things. There are times you need to change the dosage of your medicine. I mean, it's a practice, and it's something that you live with, but it's not always all-consuming. There are dark moments, absolutely, but it's not always the darkest moment of your life every single day, especially as your journey with your depression continues on. You start to learn to live with it. You start to learn to like be more vocal about it. You talk with your doctors, you get your dosages, you have very dark times, but you also just live life. And that's what Darius depicted in both books. You got to see Darius living with his depression. It was definitely more highlighted in the first book because he was dealing with an identity crisis at that time. And so you're seeing how his depression is interacting with his identity crisis. But then moving on to the second book, seeing how he's in an even better place and he's learned to advocate for himself and he's evolved in his advocacy to now advocate for those he loves and to stay firm in his boundaries and what he will accept from others. He's just such a beautiful character, just so well developed and so intriguing. I think Darius really is one of the strongest characters I've ever read about in such an underrated way, because they might seem like small successes and just like a person going about their life, but again, the fact that he is living with depression and the fact that he's so young, like he's a junior, I believe, and yet he's already learned these things that took me a good 3 more years to figure out, to even get a concept for. And he's already figuring it out for himself. I just love that. Next up, we have Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. Amari is my little sister. I love her so much. And Amari and the Night Brothers, Amari's big brother has disappeared. He has disappeared off the face of the planet. And as the time has passed, and with him being a black boy, no one is really looking for him anymore. The police have all written it off as him being involved in the wrong crowd. His mother, for the most part, in trying to raise her daughter, has just gone along with what the police have said and have focused her hardest on protecting Amari. But Amari refused to sit in that lie. Amari knows the truth of her brother's character and knows that he would never disappear. And so she tries to figure out the truth of what happened to her brother, which brings her to the Bureau of Supernatural Affairs, a whole new world that Amari knew nothing about, but apparently it's a world that her brother was deeply involved in. And so Amari finds herself at the Bureau of Supernatural Affairs trying to figure out what happened to her brother and what exactly caused his disappearance. This little girl right here, so much braver than I ever was in my entire life, like truly braver than I currently am. She is so young, and yet she was so determined to find out the truth about her brother, and she went in with no regards for her own safety, quite frankly. She just knew that there was a truth behind her brother's disappearance that would clear his name, and she was so determined to find it. There was instances in which people thought less of her because she was low income or because of her race, and Amari never let any of that truly bring her down, because at the end of the day, she knew what her goal was. Her goal was to find her brother, or at the very least to find out the truth surrounding him. So beautiful. I love this book. I wish I had this book when I was a kid. I loved it so much. My favorite side character is the elevators. I loved literally every single one of them. It was such a fun and fascinating part of the story. It was just so pure and so fun. And again, to have like this fun world with this brave character at the forefront in the center of it all, I just love it so much. And then, just literal black girl magic right here. If you have a young reader in your life, please get this book for them. If you are a reader, which if you're watching this, chances are you are, please read this book. It is just so cute. My friend Maria actually bought this book for me, and when I read it, I was like talking to her about how much I loved the book and how cute it was, and she was like, and to think at some point you'll be able to share this with your niece. And literally the entire time I was reading this book, that's all I could think about is like, one day I get to read this with my niece, and it's gonna be so much fun and so cute. Just all the little black girls in the world need to read Amari and her story, because she is so brave and she is so determined, and she just has so many characteristics that I can now see in my younger self. But also, having worked in a school at a period of time, there were so many young girls I worked with that Amari reminded me of. That's how I was as a little kid. Like, you couldn't tell me anything. I was always going to explore it for myself. I was always going to find the answer for myself, and that's something that I saw in so many other young girls I worked with when I was working inside a school, of them being curious about things and asking questions and being determined to find answers, even if the teacher or I couldn't provide it for them. They were going to find the answers, and they were leaders in their own right, and that's exactly what Amari is. She is a leader. She is someone that so many young readers can look up to. And at number 6, we have Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. Remember all those great things I literally just described about Amari, of like literal black girl magic? Welcome to Bree. Just literal same thing. Like, okay. This is like Amari grown up, but also a different magic system, so there's that. Legendborn follows Bree, who has just lost her mother, and in dealing with her grief decides to go to a college program for gifted young high school students. Now, while she's at this program, she witnesses an interaction between what seems to be a normal guy and what also seems to be a demon creature. What is going on? We do not know. Now, the guy finds out that Bree witnessed the interaction and goes up to her to erase her memory. Joke's on him, however, because that very same feeling that he gave her by trying to erase her memory reminded her that this is not the first time that someone's tried to erase her memory. And in fact, the first time that someone did this was at the hospital when her mother passed. Now, the person that she witnesses interacting with the demon is a part of a highly acclaimed society at this college. And so Bree does everything in her power to figure out what exactly this society has to do with her mother's death. This book, what do I love about this book? Literally everything. I love the depiction of grief in this book and how it was something that was touched upon on every aspect of this book. The reason that Bree is the way that she is at the beginning of this book is because her mother has just passed. She is trying to avoid the fact that her mom has just passed, but every action she partakes in, every essence of her being is trying to remind her that she is grieving, and every decision she makes is surrounding the fact that she is grieving her mother's death. She is trying to find answers to her mother's death, and she is trying to deal with her grief all in this process. Or maybe not so much. She's not really trying to deal with her grief, and you can see how that impacts her decision making. There's this analogy of grief that surrounds a ball in a box, and at the very beginning of losing someone, the ball is very big, and so it's constantly knocking around in the corners of this box, and every time it's hitting these corners, your grief is inside it. You're being reminded of this person. You're feeling this intense sadness and all the things that come along with grief. But as time passes, the ball starts to get smaller. And as the ball starts to get smaller, it's still knocking around in the corners of the box, but it's doing it a lot less frequently. You never stop loving the person you love, even after years have passed of them passing on. But the all-consuming grief happens less as the years go on. You still love them, and you're even reminded of them passing times throughout the years, and you also experience intense grief as time continues on, but they happen a lot less frequently than they do when that person first passes. And so reading Bree's story, you can really see that of like, this grief is very fresh. It has been literal months since her mom has passed. So this ball is knocking around in her corners all the time. But instead of like letting it consume her, instead of just letting herself cry or experience the grief that she needs to experience, Bree chooses the avoidance route and decides that she's not going to acknowledge her mother's passing, or she's not going to let it consume her in this all powerful grief that it is. And so it just greatly impacts her decision-making processes. And to see that as someone who has experienced that type of like intense grief, but also the magic system in this world, so freaking beautiful. I can't describe what exactly I love about the magic system in this book because it is a spoiler. But oh my god, do I love the magic system in this book. I am looking for this type of magic in other fantasy books because it was just so great. I felt so much unity with this book and the character. I just loved it so much. I loved the discussion of generational curses and generational trauma. Another aspect that I absolutely loved about this book is that when I heard about this book, I was like, okay, all for it, because look at good sis on the front. I want this. I want this book for this reason alone. Literally for this reason alone. Right there. Her face. However, I was really confused. I was confusion on what a black girl had to do with Arthurian legend. I was like, make it make sense, because how is a black girl with Merlin in them? Tracy Dion was like, actually, yes, a black girl will be a part of this lore. She will be inserted into the story. And guess what? She has a place there. It was beautiful. Oh my god. This is also dark academia. I love the commentary of higher education and its relationship with people of color, specifically with black people, how you can be on a college campus, especially the campuses that are extremely old, and how more than likely slaves are the reason that institution was built, and that institution was built on the backs and the enslavement of black people in America. Just loved these discussions. Next up at number 5, we have Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. I love this woman with my whole heart, soul, and being, and this book is absolutely the reason why. Monday's Not Coming follows Claudia, who is the best friend of Monday. Now, Monday has gone completely missing, and no one is looking for this child. No one seems worried by her disappearance. No one seems to be taking her being missing as seriously as Claudia is. So Claudia takes it within her own power and her control to find out what happened to her best friend. This book shattered me. I mean, shattered me. Shattered my perceptions of the world. Well, no, this is how I perceive the world. But shattered my perceptions of what books can truly delve upon and how books can bring up serious topics such as this. It was beautiful. Literally, I read this book and my mind was blown at how Tiffany D. Jackson decided to depict this story. Young girls of color go missing every single day. And unfortunately, their stories are not told quite often. The majority of the young girls of color that go missing will never have their story told. In Monday's Not Coming, Tiffany D. Jackson delves upon this topic so beautifully. I was just entranced. I was reading every page. I hated characters just on the premise that they were adult, that wasn't taking Monday's disappearance seriously. I was just so confused and loving my confusion. It was so fast paced and rushed. I truly felt for Claudia in her fear and in her need to find her best friend. And then I finished the book, and I don't think I've ever cried so hard in my entire life for a book. I was shattered. Like, face red. Face the color of this book. Eyes bloodshot and crying. Puffy and ugly. Such a beautiful book. Such a great way of depicting the story, and such an important messaging behind the story. Like I said, so many black girls, so many girls of color go missing every single day, and their stories are not told. And then to see it in this book depicted so truly and raw and honestly, this book is beautiful. The amount of theories that I had for this book, and actually, I am somebody, I'm not to toot my own horn, but I am very good at finding out plot twists. Like, I find out plot twists like that. It is the easiest thing for me. It is very rare that I don't figure out the plot twist, and yet Monday's Not Coming, I had no clue. I had no clue what I had theories, and while I was semi-right, the grand scheme of things, I had no clue about, and that was such a great experience. Like, wow. Now, next up, I do not actually have the physical copy of this book, but at slot number 4, we have Know My Name by Chanel Miller. I bow to thee. Know My Name is the memoir of the Stanford sexual assault case victim. I read this through the audiobook, and it was so very impactful. And I was drawn to this book because of the subject matter. Truly, I had read her victim statement when it was published by BuzzFeed, I believe, and I was like, I remember how powerful that victim statement is. I do actually want to read her memoir. During the book, Chanel Miller mentions that she has a background in slam poetry and in writing in general. Her mother is a writer. Chanel Miller likes to write, and she has that background in slam poetry. You can feel that every single chapter, through every single thing she discussed, you really see how valuable she finds words in her writing. Like, it just, having her read it herself, it truly felt like a long slam poem that was like an oxymoron in itself, but it felt like a call to action. It felt like poetry, but in a memoir. It was just so powerful and so empowering. Like, I just really feel for Chanel Miller and all that she went through, and how brave and strong she was able to be during this process, and how courageous she had to be to actually share her story. I just, wow. Also, as a person that majored in journalism and then minored in criminal justice, reading this book, it was kind of like my major and minor combining, because she did have discussions of how the media has truly failed her and how they have victim blamed, and then how the law essentially did the exact same thing, and how in America we have it for the defense to have a fast and speedy trial, and yet that did not occur because the defense was an affluent person and was not dealing with any consequences to their actions for the majority of this trial, because the trial kept getting pushed back further and further, and her life has honestly been placed on pause because they refused to let this trial continue on. This was her time to stand in her truth and tell the story from her perspective, in her truth and in her rawest form. This is quite frankly the greatest memoir I have ever read. It had me crying. Listening to her narrate it herself, just so beautiful. I respect Chanel Miller so much, and I'm so happy I read this book in 2021. It was such a powerful piece of text. Next up, at number 3, we have Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. Sarai and Laszlo have my heart. I think about them daily. Clearly, I cannot tell you the plot of this book because it is the second in a duology, so that would be a terrible decision. But I will tell you the plot of Strange the Dreamer, which follows Laszlo Strange, who is a dreamer. He has his nose stuck in a book more often than not, and honestly, he eats fairy tales for breakfast. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, read Strange the Dreamer so that you can. And the story that Laszlo loves the most is that of the city of Weep. The city's name is not actually Weep, but one day when Laszlo was just a young tot, pretending to be one of these grand soldiers of this city, he went to scream out the name, the great name of the city, and all that could come out of his mouth was Weep. All of a sudden, the city was lost to his mind and the mind of everybody else. No one of the outer world truly believed that Weep exists. But joke's on them, because the Tiger King comes to find people to bring back to the city of Weep to help them deal with a circumstance. There is some great mystery surrounding the city of Weep, and so Laszlo finds himself a part of a group of people set off to find out the mystery of Weep and how to fix the circumstances of the lost and forgotten city. This book is so good. Like, so good. Yes, I love Stranger Dreamer so much. It's such a beautiful book. It's such a beautiful text. It really is. But Muse of Nightmares truly did something to where an already masterful piece of work, an already amazing story, was made better in the second book. It is not often that the second book is greater than the first. But man, like, and especially for a story that is as great as Strange the Dreamer, like, that's already a 5-star read. And yet Muse of Nightmares is a 5-star read. So, but they're not on the same level, because Muse of Nightmares is even better. So it's like a mega 5-star read, if that makes sense. Like, do you get it? Because I love The Children of the Citadel Like, at some point in the story, I loved every single one of them. And I love the writing of this book. It's so lyrical and just, it's like a warm hug. I finished reading this book however long ago, and I still think about Sarai and Laszlo and thinking about where their story continues on. Like, I have this thought in my head of how their story continues. And at number 2, we have Yolk by Mary H.K. Choi. Yolk follows the relationship between two sisters by the name of Jane and June. This book had so many different layers to it that each worked to truly impact me as a reader, especially in the time that I read it. I've definitely discussed how I read this in a time where I was not doing all too well. I was coming out of a mental health crisis of my own, and so to read about a character that handled things very similarly to how my younger self would handle things, with avoidance, with self-deprecation. This book does have a content warning for discussions of disordered eating and body dysmorphia. There is a very lovely content warning note at the very beginning of this text that you definitely need to read before going into it. You are truly experiencing someone with disordered eating and inside their head, so it's very raw and can be very overwhelming for people with the same, for people who are triggered by the subject matter. Especially if you're somebody who has gone through this yourself, I would definitely suggest taking a good self-reflective moment and figuring out where you are in your journey and if this is the right text for you to read at this time, because again, you're truly in the head of someone dealing with an ED, and it can just be very intense to experience when you have experiences in that area. I know that if I was in a different place mentally, like if I had read this book even like a week or two before, it would have been far too much for me to experience. But it was the fact that I was coming out of a mental health crisis of my own, and to see these sisters' bonds, it just felt so true and so honest to what it's like to have a sister, especially when there is that sibling that for whatever period of time or at some point had to be like the second mom or kind of like a mother figure to the younger sibling. And so to see how that was translated into their relationship when they're only 3 years apart, and just seeing that dynamic, I could really see me and my sister's relationship reflected in Jane and June. The place I was in the time that I read it, just felt so on the nose to what I was going through. There was just so many small things involved in this book that I absolutely related to, and was like, not only related to, but like related to specifically at that time. It was honestly kind of scary. Now, before we get into my number 1 read of 2021, I do have some honorable mentions here, which I will not be discussing the synopsis for, but I will be highlighting what exactly I loved about these books. They are not necessarily the direct runner-ups to my top 10, but they are books that truly impacted me during the year 2021 that I really, really love. First up, we have The Heart Principle by Helen Wong. I love this book because it was just a raw and honest depiction of mental health, of what it's like to be the caregiver to your parent, and just the strain and fatigue, both emotionally and mentally, it can put on the individual caring for their parent. It felt so raw while reading this book because Helen Wong was reflecting on her experiences caring for her mother while her mother was ill with cancer. And so you can just tell that the author had a relationship with being a caretaker to their parent. Just so beautiful. Also, this is another book that delved upon what it's like to have an older sibling that has a huge age gap between you and had to be the second mom at a time, and how those dynamics can be very tricky for siblings, especially when you get older. Sometimes your bond can grow stronger, and sometimes you find yourself stuck in those dynamics of, I'm your older sister, you must respect me. I am your second mom, I know what's best for you. And just beautiful. Next up, we have The Black Veins by Asia Monet. Truly a friend group I want to be a part of. I laughed so much during this book. It brought me so much joy, and just so many strong characters throughout this entire novel. I was connected to every last member. I love Storm. She is hilarious, but I also love Blythe and her journey, as she was so determined to find her family. She was so strong. Again, the same things I love in Bree and in Amari are the same things I love in Blythe. Her determination to get to her end goal, which was to find her family and protect them, was so amicable and just so beautiful. I loved it. I freaking loved it. And next I have Felix Ever After by Kaysen Callender. I love this book so much. I love this book mainly because it is such a young voice giving such valuable information and with such a strong perspective. Felix is so young. He's in his summer between junior and senior year, preparing for what life after high school is going to look like, and then also dealing with his gender identity and sexuality and trying to figure out all of this stuff, while also dealing with horrible people that continuously try to prove to Felix that who they say they are isn't who they truly are. They're constantly trying to prove to Felix that the identity that they identify as doesn't actually encompass who they are, trying to tell Felix who they are as if anybody would know more about Felix than Felix would know about themselves. And then Felix themselves questioning their sexuality and questioning their gender identity, having those moments of being like, okay, they're not right about that, but it's still impacting how secure they feel in themselves, because they are feeling insecure about their gender identity. And then having the outside world, people that don't really know Felix, still having an opinion on who they are. Like, you have no right. And just to see that depiction, such a young person to have to go through, and how determined and how just strong Felix stood in their truth. Once Felix had the answers to who they wanted to be and who they are, no one could tell them anything. Honestly, even when Felix was questioning their own identity, they still were like, what you're saying is a lie. I know that much. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I identify, but I know that I don't identify as that, and I'm not going to allow you to I'm not going to allow you to disrespect me in that way. There is just certain boundaries that Felix refused to let others cross. Such a great character moment to have them say, I have my place in the world. I know where it is, and you're not going to move me from this. I know my value and my worth, and you're not going to tell me otherwise. Loved seeing that. Loved hearing that from such a young person. And finally, in our number one spot for the day, do you guys know what it is? Of course you know what it is. At number one, my number one read for 2021, Ace of Spades by Farida Abika Inyemere. Ace of Spades follows Chiamaka and Devon, who are the only black students at their prestigious private academy. Now, Chiamaka and Devon genuinely have nothing in common except for the fact that they are the only two black kids in this entire school. All of a sudden, someone has made it their prime mission to divulge the information of Chiamaka and Devon. And these are secrets that Chiamaka and Devon do not want to share. They're hidden truths. They're things that they don't want anybody else to know. And this person, under the false name of Aces, decides to divulge all of Chiamaka's and Devon's deepest, darkest secrets to the entire school. This book right here. I love this book so much. You cannot tell me otherwise. I've never seen myself so much in a book. I literally have not. It was just so impactful because I love Devon with my whole heart, soul, and being. He captured my heart like so quickly. He captured my heart absolutely so quickly. I just wanted to hug him throughout this entire book. But Chiamaka, to see someone after so long of trying to blend in with the rest of the crowd, and yes, she's kind of like the mean girl now, but it's also just like this layer in this front that she's put up to protect herself because of all the time she was made fun of when she was younger. So to then have her being in a place where she's not only having her race brought up to her time and time again, but she's also having these moments where she's standing firm in her identity and in her blackness, and she's starting to find pride in her blackness, and she's starting to stand up to herself. Chiamaka is finally being honest with herself and those around her about where she stands in the situation. She's speaking out about how uncomfortable it makes her when they point out that her hair is different. She's speaking up about all the microaggressions she's dealing with and have dealt with from people who are supposed to be friends of hers. So much of the journey Chiamaka goes through in this book is the journey I went through in my senior year and junior year of high school. There's not a single book I have ever read that saw me so clearly. Also, the author's note, oh my god, had me bawling, crying. I have two versions of the author's note because I have the Illumicrate edition of Ace of Spades as well. And that one came with an author's note. That note had me crying. This author's note at the end of this book had me crying. This whole book was like a love letter to young black girls like myself who had dealt with insecurity surrounding our race, who dealt with isolation and alienation because of our race, and is a hopeful message that it does get better, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it starts with your love for yourself and your blackness and your identity. I love this book so much. Alright y'all, so that is everything for today. Those are my top 10 reads of 2021. If you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed my face, my voice, my extraness, go ahead and press that like button down below and press the subscribe button and bell notification if you like to be notified when I upload. If you like to stay connected with me, as I would like to stay connected with you, I of course have all my social media links down below as well. And if you like to support this channel further, I of course will have my Amazon wishlist and my coffee linked down below as well. What have been some of your top reads of 2021? I would love to hear them down below and maybe give me some ideas of what I should be reading in 2022. And with no further ado, I believe that is everything, although I am probably forgetting something because I always forget something, but bye guys!